The rain was pounding against my windshield while I sat in a grocery store parking lot staring at a declined bank card. And for the first time in my life, I honestly wondered if the people I loved would be happier if I simply disappeared.
Welcome back to God Showed Up Stories. Tonight's story is for the people carrying silent pressure nobody else fully sees. The fathers trying to stay strong. The husbands quietly falling apart behind closed doors. The people smiling in public while privately wondering how much more they can take. Sometimes pain doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it slowly wears a person down month after month until they barely recognize themselves anymore. And if you've ever felt emotionally exhausted, ashamed, disconnected from your purpose, or alone in your struggle, this story is for you. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need encouragement tonight. And comment below. Have you ever gone through a season where life completely humbled you? No matter how dark the season feels, never forget this. God still knows how to reach people in the middle of their lowest moments.
I used to believe stability was permanent. For over 20 years, I woke up at the same time every morning, drove the same route to work, parked in the same section of the lot, and walked through the same warehouse doors carrying the same coffee thermos in my hand. I built my entire identity around being dependable, reliable, steady, the kind of man who took care of his family no matter what. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed in less than 15 minutes. They called several of us into a conference room before lunch. Nobody spoke much. The manager looked nervous before he even opened his mouth. That's when I knew. Downsizing, corporate restructuring, budget cuts. Words that sounded professional enough to hide the reality that dozens of people were suddenly losing the lives they spent years building. I remember sitting there staring at the table while someone explained severance packages and transition resources. But honestly, I barely heard any of it. All I could think was, how am I going to tell my family? When I got home, I tried to sound calm. I told my wife it would be okay. I told my daughter I'd find something soon. I even forced a smile while saying it. At first, I believed it myself. I updated my resume immediately, applied everywhere, reached out to old contacts, took interviews, stayed positive. But weeks slowly turned into months, and each rejection started feeling heavier than the last. The savings account that once made me feel secure started shrinking faster than I expected. Then, the pressure inside our house began changing everything. At first, the arguments were small. Stress about groceries, bills, spending, late payments. But eventually every conversation felt tense before it even started. My wife stopped talking to me the way she used to. Not cruelly, just distant. Like she was emotionally backing away little by little because she didn't know how to reach me anymore. And honestly, I didn't know how to reach myself either. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped shaving regularly, stopped answering calls from friends because I didn't want to explain my situation. The shame was unbearable. There's something about losing the ability to provide that quietly destroys a man from the inside. I started feeling invisible, useless, weak. Even sitting at the dinner table became uncomfortable because I constantly felt like everyone was silently disappointed in me. One night, my daughter asked if I could help pay for an upcoming school trip. I froze for a second too long before answering, and I saw the look on her face immediately. She already knew the answer before I said it. That moment stayed with me for days. A few weeks later, my wife and I had the worst argument of our marriage. It started over money. But it wasn't really about money anymore. It was about exhaustion, fear, distance. Everything we hadn't been saying out loud for months. At one point, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said something that completely shattered me. "I don't even recognize you anymore." The room went quiet after that. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain how terrified I felt every single day. But instead, I just stood there emotionally numb while she packed a small bag later that night and told me she was going to stay with her sister for a while. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the entire house. And suddenly, the silence became unbearable. I sat alone in the living room for hours afterward, staring at family photos on the wall. Birthdays, vacations, smiling faces. Moments that suddenly felt like they belonged to somebody else's life. That was the first night I truly questioned everything. My purpose, my faith, my worth, even God. I prayed, but the prayers sounded empty. Where are you? Why is this happening? What am I supposed to do now? No answers came. At least, not immediately. The weeks after that felt darker than anything I had ever experienced. I tried hiding it from my daughter whenever she visited, but internally I was falling apart. One rainy night, I drove to the grocery store with barely enough money left in my account to buy a few basic things: bread, milk, eggs, soup. I remember standing at the checkout pretending not to panic while the cashier ran my card. Declined. She tried again. Declined. People behind me started shifting impatiently. My chest tightened so badly I could barely breathe. I quietly asked her to cancel the order, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the rain feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. I sat inside my car, gripping the steering wheel while water streamed down the windshield, and then something inside me finally broke. Not anger, not frustration, just complete emotional exhaustion. I cried harder than I had cried in years. The kind of crying that comes from carrying too much pressure for too long. I remember lowering my head and whispering something I never thought I would say out loud. My family would probably be better without me. Even now, admitting that hurts. Because I didn't truly want to disappear. I just wanted the pain to stop. I sat there for several minutes, staring blankly through the rain before noticing movement nearby. An elderly man in the parking lot had dropped several grocery bags beside his car. Cans rolled across the wet pavement while he struggled to bend down and pick them up. For a second, I almost stayed where I was. I barely had enough strength to help myself. But something inside me still pushed the car door open. I jogged over through the rain and started helping gather his groceries. He looked exhausted too. Older, fragile, but kind. When we finished loading the bags into his trunk, he looked at me for a moment longer than most strangers normally would. Then he asked quietly, "You doing all right, son?" I almost gave the normal answer. "Yeah, I'm fine." But for some reason, I couldn't say it. Maybe because I was too tired to pretend anymore. I looked away and quietly said, "Not really." The rain kept falling around us while he nodded slowly, like he understood more than I realized. Then he said something I will never forget. Sometimes the hardest seasons convince good people that they've become failures. I felt my throat tighten immediately, because somehow that single sentence described exactly what I had been carrying. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder and continued, "But losing your footing doesn't mean losing your value." That was it. No dramatic speech, no miracle, just a simple moment in a rainy parking lot. But something about those words cracked through the darkness I had been trapped inside for months. Before leaving, he smiled gently and said, "Your family still needs you, more than you know." I sat in my car afterward, thinking about that conversation for a long time. And for the first time in months, I prayed honestly instead of angrily. Not polished, not impressive, just honest. "God, help me find my way back." The following weeks didn't magically fix everything overnight, but slowly, things began changing. A former coworker unexpectedly called me about an opening at a smaller company. The pay wasn't perfect, but it was work, steady work. And after months of feeling unwanted, simply hearing someone say, "We'd be lucky to have you," brought me to tears after the interview. My daughter slowly started opening up to me again, too. One evening, we sat on the porch together, talking for nearly 2 hours about life, fear, pressure, and mistakes. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like her father again, instead of a broken man pretending to hold things together. Eventually, my wife came home, not because every problem disappeared, but because she started seeing pieces of me returning. The bitterness slowly softened. The walls between us slowly lowered. We started talking again, really talking, about fear, marriage, pride, pressure, healing. And honestly, I think losing everything forced me to finally stop pretending I was invincible. Before all of this happened, I believed strength meant carrying everything silently. Now I understand. Real strength sometimes means admitting you're struggling before the darkness convinces you nobody cares. Looking back now, I don't think God showed up through some giant dramatic miracle. I think He showed up through small moments. A stranger in a parking lot, unexpected kindness, a phone call at the right time, a quiet conversation with my daughter, the slow rebuilding of a hurting family. And maybe that's what someone watching this needs to hear tonight. Healing doesn't always happen instantly. Sometimes God restores people slowly, one conversation at a time, one prayer at a time, one painful step at a time. But that doesn't make the restoration any less real. And if you're sitting in a dark season right now, wondering whether your life still matters, it does. More than you know.
If this story touched your heart, comment below. God wasn't finished with me. And if you're walking through a difficult season right now, please remember this. Your value does not disappear just because life became heavy. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who may need encouragement tonight. You never know who might be silently struggling behind a smile. Thank you for being here with God Showed Up Stories. And always remember, God always shows up right on time.